Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Crime Scene to Screen. My name is Joe and I'm joined this evening by a lovely Thérèse Ray.
Hello.
And yes, as I said, we have a very special edition of Crime Scene to Screen for you. In the run up to Halloween, we thought we would look at the 1996 Wes Craven classic Scream and the terrible crimes that influenced the film. So basically, there are two crimes that are sort of linked to the film itself. The first is the Gainesville Ripper, who's a guy called Danny Rollins who went on a killing spree in Gainesville, Florida in the early 90s. And it was this incident that writer of Scream, Kevin Williamson, seen on the news and just inspired him just to jump to his typewriter and write Scream. And there is also the subsequent crime that was actually influenced, well, the murderers claimed they were influenced by Scream, and that was the murder of Casey Joe Stoddart. So I think there's not much else to really say at the minute, except that maybe we should just jump right into it.
Yeah, I mean, we're covering two cases today. The Danny Rollins case is quite big. Joe has went into his background quite a bit, which I think for when looking at anyone who's went through a crime spree or serial killers, it's always good to sort of have a basis of where they've came from. And then I'm kind of going to run over the horrific murder of Casey Joe, which happened after the release of Scream and by two horrible human beings. But as Joe says, because we have the two crimes, might as well just get straight in.
Let's hop to it. So, firstly, we're going to cover Danny Rollin. Danny Rollin, aka the Gainesville Ripper, is responsible for the murder of 8 people between 1989 and 5 over the course of a few days in 1990. He was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1964. He had a very, very troubled childhood, and that predominantly came from his abusive father. His father himself was a cop who had served in the Korean War, and it was a result of serving in that war that led to a lot of PTSD that sort of accentuated and made worse any underlying mental illnesses he had. So as he grew up, he was constantly abused, and he was told he was worthless and that he was an accident. So all of that was weighing down on him as a child. His only escape was by playing music, which would sort of play into his trial, but we'll get to that later.
I wish we didn't have to discuss that part, but we definitely will have
to. Yeah, unfortunately, it's just, you know what, his music's just basically, just to get out of the way, it's shite bag country. We'll get to it when we get to it, but yeah, he is a piece of shit, so frig him anyway. But yes, back to Danny himself. When he became an adult, he joined the Air Force, but was kicked out for drugs possession. He was basically just all over the place, but he found a bit of stability when he moved in with his grandfather, who sort of, his Christian background sort of stabilized him a wee bit. And he actually married as well to a lady called, and this is just like our last episode where I couldn't pronounce names. Her name is quite strange, so just bear with me a second. Yeah, I think it's
sound it out.
Right. I think it's Omahar Halko. It's probably completely wrong, me pronouncing it, but anyway, this lady who he married, he had a daughter with her, but just like his upbringing and his family background, he eventually abused her and the daughter, and eventually that, coupled with he had these strange voyeuristic tendencies, it eventually led to his divorce, and with that a sort of downward spiral for him, where he committed multiple acts of armed robbery and sexual abuse upon women. And he spent a lot of time in jail in the likes of Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. And he himself, he said, like, this came later in his trial, but at the time he said it was like a deep swing between his faith and pure evil. So he sort of painting this picture as someone who is unhinged, who is capable of anything, but he hasn't really indulged in the
what
the
he really
heinous
wants
acts of
to
murder.
do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically the sort of background of Danny. But the thing is,
And what a background it was as
yeah, not your average background.
No.
I can say, lucky for ourselves, not to experience anything as heinous as that. But yeah, like I said, things really came to a head from his acts of armed robbery and his voyeurism became really bad whenever he committed murder in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1989. It was the result of a home invasion where he had murdered 55-year-old William Grissom, his daughter Julie, who's 24, and their grandson Sean, who was only 8 at the time.
It's wild.
I should have actually said this a bit earlier, but there is a bit of a trigger warning with this episode, just given the nature of the crimes and just conveying how brutal and sadistic this man was. So this is sort of the beginning of that. So just be warned. So like I said, it was a home invasion. He broke in and he basically killed all 3 of them. And Julie's body was mutilated, and he cleaned it and he posed it. And this would come into play with his crimes, which would take place, the majority of his crimes, which take place a year later in Gainesville. But prior to that as well, it was interesting. He got in a heated argument with his father, and it resulted in him shooting him twice,
Right.
Once in the stomach and once in the head. But it didn't kill his father. Like, his father didn't die from that. He lost an eye and an ear as a result. But that's not even the strangest thing. The strangest thing is he didn't even, go to the police about it.
Prosecute or anything?
Yeah, exactly. He didn't prosecute or anything like that. So it was just a case of he washed his hands of him. I think it was just that whole weird sort of pride to him.
Relationship they had, maybe?
Yeah, that too, yeah. It's the weird dynamic they had growing up, and he was just too proud to admit, like, oh, my son got the better of me.
Yeah.
Even though it cost him an eye and an ear, but that's just the twisted, warped logic of him. But like I said, everything came to a head in August of 1990 in Gainesville in Florida, when he engaged in acts of complete barbarism and murder, when he took the lives of 5 students in the Gainesville area. The first of which took place on Friday, August 21st, in the early hours in the morning. He broke in the apartment of 2 17-year-old girls. Their names were Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. Now, when he initially broke in, Powell was asleep on the sofa downstairs. And after standing over for a wee bit of time, he sort of just decided to explore upstairs. And that's where he saw Larson in her bedroom sleeping. So his first instinct was to tape her mouth shut and to stifle any screams so Powell wouldn't wake up downstairs. And that's when he stabbed her to death. But she did try and fight him off, but unfortunately he was just too strong for her, and she succumbed to the stab wounds. And then he went back downstairs and he taped Powell's mouth shut and put her on her stomach, and he raped and stabbed her, cutting off her clothes. And before leaving, he put the bodies in a strange sort of pose that were sort of sexually provocative, a bit like he had in the earlier case with Julie Grisham.
The younger girl, yeah.
Yeah, it all stems from that weird voyeuristic sort of thing he had when he was younger and continued to have. But the weirdest thing is he took a shower before leaving the apartment.
Yeah.
So it's not a case of, in and out, He took his time. He posed the bodies out. It was a very, very strange case. His spree then continued the next day when he broke into the apartment of an 18-year-old, Krista Hoyt. He pried open her sliding door with a knife and a screwdriver, and that's actually important to come into play in how he eventually got caught. So once he broke in, this is the creepiest part. I think this is the creepiest of all of the murders he committed. He waited in her living room for her to come back.
Oh, yeah.
So at 11 in the clock in the morning, she eventually entered the apartment, and he sort of sprung himself on her and put her in a chokehold. And again, like the other cases, he stabbed her with her mouth shut and her wrists bound, and he raped her as well, just like in the case of the Christina Powell. But the thing about this particular murder, it's the thing with Krista Hoyt, she reminded him of his ex-wife, so that resulted in the most brutal of the murders of.
There was an escalation there.
Yeah, he actually decapitated her, and he placed her head on like a mantelpiece in front of the bed, so as if the head was looking at the body, as he, with the other murders, posed it. Yeah, posed it. I hate using that word, and I hate describing it as that, but it is the crime, and again, it's just one of those things.
It's the word that's like, I would agree with you in the sense that pose. When you're someone who's looking at the crime, you feel uncomfortable to say that it was posed, because posing something, there's when someone poses, or when you pose something, there's like an element of admiration for it.
Yeah.
So when you think about that when certain serial killers pose their bodies after they've committed the murders, that like it comes back to their sort of weird mentality of that's them and their admiration. They're posing the body as how they want it to be found, for explicit reasons, but at the same time they're posing it because they want to admire their work, so to say.
Yeah, it's like the whole idea of pleasure, power, and control that the majority of serial killers have. So by doing that, it's the rush he got from it. But yeah, by this stage, the bodies of the first two ladies have been found, and then eventually that of Christa's as well. And at this stage, the whole area became complete chaos and a media frenzy. It's a bit like in Scream, whenever the first murders happen in that film.
Yeah,
it's essentially like that there, where students in the area were told, travel in groups, sleep in the same rooms together and stuff like that.
Don't go out at night. Yeah,
stuff like that there. And then the police had just started locking down the area, taking blood samples from different blood and saliva samples from different men in the area. It was just complete shock and horror just everywhere around him. But the thing is, that wasn't the end of it all. The last of Danny Ron's crimes came on the Monday, when he broke into the apartment of Tracy Paul's 23-year-old girl who was living with a guy called Manny Taboda. Again, like the previous crime, he pried open the sliding door with the screwdriver and the knife. And he'd found Taboda sleeping in a bedroom. And Taboda himself was supposed to have been like a pretty strong fella. I think he was quite athletic. So he kind of underestimated him, and they had a major struggle. And there was times where he almost got the better of him, but then obviously Danny runs with the knife. He had a knife on him, so he got the better of him in the end. But the thing is, Tracy heard the commotion of all this here, and she went down the hall towards the bedroom where all the noise was coming from, and that's when she saw Danny Rawlins. So she just bolted straight to her bedroom, tried to barricade herself in, but unfortunately, he broke through. And again, like the previous cases, he bound her, stabbed her, and raped her. And just like before, posed the bodies and subsequently left. So with these sort of crimes, there was a few suspects in line. There was a guy called Edward Humphrey who had mental health issues. They suspected him because he was constantly going around making outrageous statements about wanting to kill and murder. So they obviously first guy you'd go to. But then eventually, he was cleared of the charges, because on September the 7th of 1990, Rollins was arrested in Okla, which is an area nearby, for burglary. And when they were investigating that burglary, they found the tools that he had used to pry open the doors and
Yeah.
stuff like that there. And then they found that led him finding a camp that he was staying in the woods just beside
I
Gainesville.
know that
That's
bit's
the
really
strangest.
weird.
Yeah.
That's really weird. Because we both what you had certain research in. There's a few documentaries that you can find on YouTube. Some are great, some are completely over the top staged, as you can imagine. But there's one that does a reconstruction of the area, and it's almost as if he was living like Bear Grylls, but like he had this real survivalist mentality that was weird because it didn't stem or relate to like anything from his childhood. Like, yes, he obviously had his childhood was full of quite a lot of abuse and stuff like that, but there was nothing that would sort of hint to him being like a nomad or camping or anything like that. But I suppose with him being able to be in those areas, he was quite close to the university, and wasn't it like the university led on to like a forest or something, to where it was, so whenever he was able to like escape, essentially, he didn't have far to go to like run off and sort of hide away, or it was very hard for him to leave any sort of trace until, as you will say, he was.
Yeah, he was. Again, it's pride before the fall with this crime. You know, in his tent, he had several audio recordings. Some were of himself singing and playing guitar with his shite bag country stuff. And the key, though, was there were sort of confession tapes which alluded to him committing these crimes. So then, eventually, he was charged in November of 1991 after his previous arrest from that there, and he was charged with several counts of murder. So then the trial, then he was took forward to, again, see these names. I am never going to get my head around them.
But give it a go.
The Aluka County State Journal Len Register.
Good job, yeah.
So that trial didn't take place till 4 years after the murder. At the pre-trial, he suggested that he'd done it as, his motive to doing it was he wanted to be a superstar like Ted Bundy. And like I said, before he was actually due to go on trial, he had like a change of heart and decided just to say, yeah, I'm guilty. I did it all. And he said there's just some things you can't run from. So he's trying to just sort of evoke sort of sympathy.
Yeah, just like justify his actions. And he did play quite an awful lot on, as you were saying there, that someone from an abusive background, of course they're going to end up like this. Like, there was no other sort of path for me. And as you said, in some of his confessionals and things, that he was coming across basically saying, this is the fault of my family, this is the fault of my father. Like, I didn't have any other choice. I was always going to be a burglar. I was always going to do something bad. And then it took for him to act on his impulses that led to the horrific murders.
Exactly. And like even his mother at the trial, testified, say, oh, he came from an abusive background, this, that, and the other happened to him as a child. And then he had psychiatric evaluations, and he tried to claim that it was like a dark side of him that made him do it, known as Gemini. It's a bit similar to sort of like The Killer in Exorcist 3. It's just this weird thing. Oh, sorry, and Zodiac as well. Zodiac was known as, he called himself Gemini. So I think it was a case of, I'm going to play up in this, because it's a bit coincidental he decides to call himself Gemini after one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. But then he eventually was charged for his crimes, and he was sentenced to death.
God.
So prior to his execution, he admitted to the murders he'd committed in 1989. And if you actually read his confession statement, he just describes that, he tries to use all this poetic and flowery language. Like, he described the people he killed as outstanding souls. And he tried to play up the whole thing. Oh, I'm born again, and there's part of me that's I'm willing to face judgment and all this here. But he was never really sorry for what he done in Gainesville.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he did sort of apologize for the 3 in Louisiana that he committed, but he never really apologized for Gainesville. But he met his end by lethal injection in Florida State Prison in the 25th of October in 2006.
It's nearly the anniversary.
Oh, aye. 2 days away. There you go.
We'll celebrate.
Aye. You're lucky you had a beer. I should have got a beer.
Yeah. Yep. Here's to the bastard.
No, I wouldn't piss in his grave. But yeah, his final meal was lobster tail, and his final words were a hymn that he was constantly singing. The final words were "None greater than thee, O Lord," and that was the end of Danny Rollin. But not to just leave that case on a grim note, there is a sort of hope to it all. When I was researching further what happened in Gainesville, in relation to all this, a few days after the murder, there was an area of the college campus where temporary memorials went up, and somebody had painted a lovely memorial to each of the 5 young people who were murdered, and nobody really expected it to stay up for long, but it's still there to this day. And
oh my God.
There's scholarships named after these people. There's just so many lovely things to ensure that their memory's not forgotten. And that's something, when we're both fans of true crime, that's one thing that is always
forgotten,
sort of lost. It's the victims. Yeah. And it's just so lovely, when you're reading that, to see, they're not forgotten. They're the ones that remember, not this shite bag. It's the people. And so that's it, really. That was the case of Danny Rollin. And whenever we talk about Scream, I can talk more about how, that had sort of led
the
into
inspiration.
The film. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm going to hand things over to you now, Thérèse,
I think one thing we do have to talk about, though, just before we go, because we alluded to it earlier, was his horrific country bumpkin singing. And I suppose this is kind of on a lighter note as well, but it will kind of make you squirm a little. But Joe, I'm right in saying that that Danny was fond of a wee sing-song or two, specifically in the courtroom, more so on the day of his trial, wasn't it? He asked if the judge asked him if he had anything to say, and he decided to sing a song. Is that right?
Yes, he was serenading a lady who was basically out to get famous by being his girlfriend. I didn't want to mention her because I don't want to sensationalize her, and she's just completely horrible. If you want to know more about her, look it up on the YouTube video itself that you're alluding to, and Wikipedia and that. But basically, he was serenading her, and you can see her stand just going, "Oh, my Danny," and all that there, and just like, you're just as fucking bad as him. You're just horrible. And we're not even going to put a clip of him up here because I don't think he deserves it. I think if you do, or if you are morbidly curious just to see what he sounds like and what he sings like, look it up on YouTube. I think it's just under Danny Rollin court sentence.
We can even put links in the podcast episode information just of the videos that we used on YouTube, and specifically this video of Danny Rollin singing. And to be honest, I would put a trigger warning on it. Not that there's anything really gruesome, but it's just grim. And it's sort of his last attempt of power and control over what's happened. So a lot of the videos that Joe had used for research are really good. So if you do want to find out more about the Danny Rollins case and about the Cassie Joe Stoddard case, there is videos in there as well. But as you were saying, move quickly on to the second case that we want to talk about. Again, try to keep this as short, sweet, and direct and respectful to the victim and victim's family as possible. But this, normally whenever people you can Google Scream inspired murders. I suppose you can Google any sort of horror film, and there will always be something that is inspired by a true crime. The Danny case and the Gainesville Ripper is really horrific, but for me, it's this case that kind of has stuck with me, from I first heard about it, and it's more so just the sadisticness of two people, and what they do to their friend and someone who they both really admire. It's just horrific. So basically in 2006, so this is a good few years after Scream was released, two teenagers, two friends, Brian Draper, and this is going to be my chance at butchering a name, Brian Draper and Tori Admachek. They are both 16 and they attend Pocatello High School. They're big film fans, specifically horror movies, and they tend to make their own videos themselves. Again, along with the Danny Rollins videos, there's a lot of this stuff on YouTube. To be honest, I wouldn't really recommend watching it. If you do have that morbid curiosity, Google that video, but I couldn't even bring myself to watch theirs.
It's not even morbid curiosity. When you do watch it, like, even out of context, the way they act and talk, it's just so cringeworthy. They're just the pair of absolute losers. Like,
they're two losers that are convinced that they're going to be the next, like, Wes Craven or Eli Roth. So, in these videos, the two guys are talking about how they've always, they're sitting. So one of the biggest videos is they're in their classroom, and they have the old video cameras, and they're joking about and sort of trying to get a reaction out of their classmates, and they're saying how they'd love to murder somebody and they'd love to recreate Scream, and Scream's one of their biggest inspirations in life. And they also reference the Columbine shooting and how they have such respect for the gunman who horrifically committed all those murders. But it's strange because in the video you can see other people in the background and nobody really is paying attention to them, which I suppose comes back to this thing that the two of them are just straight up losers. Like, nobody has any interest in them.
Either don't pay attention to them, like they're just talking crap. Yeah.
But they, unfortunately, they become friends with a beautiful girl called Cassie Jo Stoddard, who is in the same class and also has an interest in film, and she expresses on numerous occasions that if they were ever to record or direct their own film, that she would be really interested in being involved. And basically these two sick, sadistic teenagers decide that they have a real interest in wanting to murder somebody, and one night plan that they're going to go to different people's houses and just commit murder. So the first house they go to, the person that they initially intend to kill isn't in the house. So they then decide and that they're going to go to Cassie's house. She is, she's house sitting for her aunt and uncle. So she's basically alone in their house, and the two boys show up to hang out with her, as well as her boyfriend Matt Beckham, who was part of their friends as well. So they basically all watch a film together. Not sure what film it was, but shortly after, Draper and Admachek decide that they would actually rather go to the cinema. So later we'll find out that the reason they said this was because they were setting up an alibi, which is just crazy to think that two 16-year-olds would comprehend doing something like this.
Yeah.
So the two teens acted like they were leaving, and they went around the back of the house and had cut the power in the house. So Cassie's boyfriend at that time left, which anything I've read, anything I've researched, I can't understand why. once something like that would happen, why he would leave.
Wasn't it a case of he asked, like, he called his ma and asked her could he stay with her?
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry.
but
Yeah.
then his ma sort of caught on. It's like, oh, a young 16-year-old fella wants to stay in the
Yeah.
house alone with his girlfriend. Not happening. I'm taking you home. But that it sort of is true what you were saying, is because then she didn't have the sense to go, Casey, you're coming with us. I think Casey was just like, no, I have to watch this house. My aunt and uncle's going to kill me if,
Yeah.
I don't,
But, again, I'm the type of person that thinks that everybody else is like me. But if that had happened to me, first of all, you're 16, you're both home alone in a massive house, from anything I've read, and all of the power goes out. Like, as you said, I'd be like, Cassie, you're coming to my house. Or alternatively, I'd be like, Mum, the powers went out. I can't leave her yet. I'll not stay. So, I suppose it's one of those woulda, shoulda, coulda situations. But unfortunately, Matt leaves and Cassie's on her own. And this is when Bran and Tori then return. They basically break into the house, and they re-entered wearing masks. Cassie at this point had managed to turn the power on again, so she had some sort of normality back. But once the two had re-entered in the house, they cut the power. But so they enter the house, both masked, and head down toward the basement. So the reason they do this is because they wanted to reenact one of the scenes in Scream, the garage scene.
Oh yeah.
So that they wanted to walk downstairs for her to check the breaker, and for them to then fulfill their sort of slasher fantasy. Two sick men.
Yeah.
Men. Shouldn't even call them men. Two sick guys. But Cassie doesn't enter the basement. She remains upstairs and is apparently searching around for different lights and candles. And the two realise that she isn't coming down. So they rush to the living room, where they both stabbed her 30 times with 2 knives. The autopsy later showed that there was 12 wounds that were fatal. 11 of which came from one single knife. So this is important when I'll talk about the interrogation. So after the murder, and this is probably one of the most horrific things of all, and again, this can be found on YouTube. I wouldn't recommend. If you're curious, by all means, but this is not something that I would recommend personally. But Draper and Admachak leave the house, get back into the car, and then they film the reaction. And I haven't watched this video, but I had listened to a few podcasts in preparation, and the Morbid True Crime podcast includes audio of the video, and to be honest, I skipped over it because it's actually just disturbing.
Yeah, I did listen to it, and I don't want to hear it again.
No,
it's just no.
It's crazy. Like all of the words that you can use to describe crazy, like
it's just unfathomable.
And the fact that it comes from 2 16-year-olds.
Yeah,
and I don't want to speak too much of what is in the video, but they're so excited, and so I copied over a few of the lines from the video just to sort of give you a bit of an idea. But they're in their car, they're videoing each other, and Draper says in the video, so he's in the POV, we just killed Cassie, we just left her house, this is not a fucking joke. And Tori says, I'm shaking. Bran, I stabbed her in the throat, I saw her lifeless body, it just disappeared, dude, I just killed Cassie. And then the two of them just then continue to laugh, and they laugh uncontrollably.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like they've just committed a prank in the principal's house or
Yeah,
something like that, and they're just sort of have that rush, like you were saying, and they're just proud of what they've done in a
and
weird, twisted
proud
way.
and just can't believe what they've done, and like their voices are shaky as well, so they're full of adrenaline, and it's this like rush that the two of them have, and it's like neither one of them are like, you know, oh, we just killed Cassie. Like, they are elated, like they're delighted of what they've just done.
Zero remorse, like none whatsoever.
Nothing. And again, I keep coming back to the point of their age, but this is one of the things that's disturbed me the most, is the fact that these are two 16-year-old fellas that think what they've done is like one of the best things that they're ever going to do in their life. And it's just, again, if you want to watch the video, watch it, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Like, I think the closest thing that I can think of in terms of like what most people would know around here is maybe the Jamie Bulger case. In the way that, you know, two young people doing this horrific crime, and well, we're not going to get in that because that's completely different tangent we don't need to get into, but it sort of has minor parallels to this one.
So as I alluded to earlier, the two fellas had said that they wanted to go to the movie, want to go to the theatre and watch a movie. So they decided at that point, after they had videoed themselves admitting to murder, that they would create an alibi. So they're both sick, but they're also extremely stupid. But this does come back and kick them in the ass. So they go to the theatre, buy 2 tickets, and give themselves an alibi. So then, unfortunately, Cassie was left. Can you hear the ice cream man outside?
Yes, and unfortunately, I don't think this can be edited out, but we'll just endure a little bit of ice cream man until you get back to the case. It's just the worst sort of thing to have. Oh, I think he stopped. Okay.
I think it stopped.
Yeah. Sorry, go on ahead.
That can't be edited out because this is obviously a live panel. So apologies.
Oops.
Back to the more serious. So the murder happened on the 22nd of September, and unfortunately Cassie was left on her own for 2 days. Again, there's a lot of questions as to why her boyfriend had never came back or never returned. Specifically when she was on her own, he hadn't been in contact, and he hadn't raised any sort of alert to anyone to say, I haven't heard from Cassie in 2 days. But I've tried to research to see, was there any sort of contact from Matt to family, but apparently there wasn't. So her aunt and uncle returned home, but unfortunately it was her 13-year-old cousin who found Cassie's body. And they, along with their 3 children, had walked in on her horrific scene. So the only sort of connection that the police had was their boyfriend, because of his mother and the aunt and uncle knew that her boyfriend would be at the house while they were away. So the police interviewed Matt Beckham, who explained that he had been at the house that night along with 2 of his friends, Draper and Adamchak, and 3 days later Brian and Tori were arrested. So both boys were interviewed about the discovery of Cassie's body. So they were both interviewed separately, and initially kind of played a poker face, didn't really give very much up. But 2 days later, the police were able to interview Brian a second time. And this was mainly down to the fact that they had searched his room and they had found an empty knife sheath, similar to one of the knives that had been used, similar in shape, to one of the knives that had been used in Cassie's murder. So on the 3rd day after they had found this, Brian and Tori initially say that they had went back to Cassie's house because they wanted to scare her. and that was all they wanted to do initially. So that's why they had the masks and the knives. But then it was Tori who was the one that decided to stab her. Brian was the one who then led the police to the clothes that they had used, the weapons, and the masks that they had used during the murder as well. So Brian basically gave the two of them up.
Yeah.
A few days later, they were formally arrested for the murder, and Brian continued to maintain that Tori had coerced him into murdering Cassie Jo. But as I had alluded to earlier, and specifically with the lines in the video, it was very clear that Brian was not coerced at all. And it actually turned out that those 11 stab wounds came directly from Brian. So, you know, if you're going to do the crime, don't admit it on video, and
Exactly.
don't be found out to having such brutality, and then try and pin it on someone else.
But that's the thing. This whole like investigation and everything just showed them the true character of both of them. The fact that, you know, one of them turned on the other one and said, "Oh, we kind of both were there, but I didn't do it. It was all, you know, the other guy. He did most of the stab, and I didn't do anything. I was trying to get him to stop, you know, all that kind of nonsense." And it just showed them for the cowards that they actually were.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it comes back to the fact that they videoed before discussing that this is what they were going to do, directly after, and then in the video directly after, they both admitted that that's what they'd done. And to think that they would never be found is just, it's just stupid behaviour.
Yeah, it's their ego. It's their ego more than anything.
And one of the kind of crazy things as well is that Brian and Tori admitted to the murder, but they never actually admitted to why they murdered her. They never gave the police or even Cassie's family any reason as to why they did it. And even to this day, they've never really gave a reason, which in my mind means that they've never, there's no remorse, that they don't care what they did.
It's a bit like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you in. I was just saying, in that way, you know, they're kind of like Danny Rollins in that sense, that like, they had no motive as such, but, you know, they just felt it was their ego that propelled them more than anything, and that, you know, they wanted to be, you know, the ultimate serial killer, you know, better than Bundy, better than Zodiac, and that not really a motive as such, it's just ego driven.
And looking to these people as idols. Like, I don't know if anybody else here has ever watched Bailey Sarian's videos. She does makeup and murder on YouTube, and one of her big things is that people need to pick better idols. And the fact that both Danny Rollins and these two boys idolized Zodiac and Ted Bundy, I mean, there wasn't much going for them, really.
Yeah.
They weren't going to allude to much.
Like, I know we talk about the likes of these people a lot, but it's out of fascination. It's not idolization, you know?
No. I'm glad that the strong majority of the people that we talk about are either dead and gone or locked up for life, because I'm fascinated, but especially these two, I'm glad that these two are off the face of the earth. It's two less scumbags that we'll have to deal with.
But the thing is, the scariest thing about them is they could have been anyone in your classroom in secondary school. Like some weird, like, loner and outsider who had like a fascination with films. Oh God, I've just implicated myself.
No, I was just thinking,
like the first episode again. Oh, the head injury. Oh, okay.
I was like, yeah, that kind of sounds like me.
But back to the.
No, we're coming toward the end anyway. I really don't want to talk too much more about these two sickos, but it's kind of alluding back as to what I said with Danny, talking about his ego and who he idolized. So the day before the murder, during the trial, they included the videos that both boys had taken of themselves. And the day before is when they recorded, basically admitting that their dream was to murder somebody, and this is what they wanted to do. And one of their lines, it's not sure if it's Brian or Tori that says it, but they wanted to be just like Scream, except real life terms. and then they compared themselves to Ted Bundy and the Zodiac, but they're amateurs in his eyes, and this was Tory that said it, a 16-year-old boy. So the prosecution kind of came out in the end and surmised that the two boys just wanted to achieve fame in the same manner as the Columbine killers, which would allude back to the fact that they videoed everything. The videos indicated that they wanted to commit multiple murders, and if they hadn't been caught, they would have more than likely committed multiple murders. They also, during the trial, as the defense had tried to go down the insanity route, but after a psychological evaluation, it indicated that both teens were of sound mind when they decided that they wanted to execute the murder of one of their best friends. The two are both, thankfully, in prison. Unfortunately, there's been different sort of rulings over the years about how minors are prosecuted as either adults or as teens. So I believe that both were prosecuted as adults, but in 2016 the US Supreme Court had ruled it unconstitutional for a minor to receive a sentence of life without parole. So this meant that both Tory and Brian could be possible for parole. But thankfully in 2017, the Idaho Supreme Court, so they're both being held in the Idaho prison, they ruled to uphold Tory and Brian's fixed 30-year conviction. So thankfully they're still in prison at the minute, but they won't be liable for parole unless things change. So this constitution is in the US Supreme Court. If both boys wanted to go down the route of a retrial or a different type of defense, there is the chance that their defense could rule in favor of this, and they could be open to parole. But hopefully it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So basically, just to tie it up then, the videos were released in 2017 around the same time of this ruling, to basically prove that these two people should not be let out. And unfortunately, because of this, as we said, the videos are available on YouTube and other places. Portions of the video exist online. It includes video footage of Tory saying that there should be no law against killing people. And later in the video, he then goes on to mention how he's horny just thinking about killing Cassie Joe. So, for these two guys to sit and say that, initially not to admit it, to then pin it on each other, to then try and go down an insanity defense with all of this evidence, is shocking. And I think that was one of the reasons that the Supreme Court released the videos, was to prove that with this new court ruling, that there will be people out there who do not deserve to be let out, do not deserve to be let on parole. Unfortunately, because of this, as you said, the videos are in the ether, so they can be accessed. But I couldn't find anything in terms of the legacy of Cassie Joe. I'm almost certain that her family lets her memory live on, and I think her boyfriend as well. For a while, I think Matt got quite a lot of criticism for his actions. I think he was also investigated as if he had knew about what had happened, but I don't believe he did. So, and the thing is, whether or not he did know about them or not, he unfortunately has to live with that for the rest of his life, that because he left that house, unfortunately, Cassie Joe was murdered.
Yeah, it's like a strange survivor's guilt that's going to stick with him forever.
So again, this wasn't initially, it didn't inspire Scream, but these murders specifically with these two boys, they said they were influenced by Scream. So I think on that note, then Joe, do you want to sort of run in with the film?
Yeah, let's get on the Scream, hopefully the fun portion of the podcast. Yeah, it's been pretty grim up to date. But yes, Scream, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, is a 1996 film from Wes Craven. Just a bit of background on it. Prior to when Scream was coming out, the slasher genre within horror was practically dead.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th, Jason was in some point between, going to hell and about to go into space. Freddy Krueger, in a prototype to this here film with New Nightmare, it was a sort of a meta horror, but the world wasn't quite ready for it yet, and it kind of flopped. And then Halloween 6 was on the horizon, or just come out, and people are just fed up with seeing these masked goons killing, promiscuous teens, because it was a tried and tested formula that was just dull by this stage. So, leading back into what I was saying earlier with the Danny Rollins case, Kevin Williamson, the writer, he was an up and coming writer in Hollywood at the time. He was down his luck. He had no money, so he was house sitting at the time. And whilst he was house sitting, he was watching a TV special on the Gainesville Ripper, Danny Rollins himself. So whilst alone in the house, he just felt really creeped out by this and just quite scared. So he called a friend just to sort of comfort himself. But on the call, they couldn't stop talking about horror films. His favorite film was Halloween, and that sort of ties into the beginning of the film, where the Ghostface killer asked, what's your favorite scary film?
Scary movie?
Exactly. So a few days later, he took himself off in isolation, like us all right now, and he wrote the first scene, basically the scene with Drew Barrymore at the very beginning, and the rest is history. He managed to sell it to the studio, and he got Wes Craven to eventually sign on board to make the film, and they just reinvented the genre, and you can see the slew of films that came after it, how influential it was. And then unfortunately the negative aspects of how influential it was when you look at the Casey Joe Stoddard case. But that kind of comes from that line by, I think it's Billy at the end. He's like, movies don't make psychos, movies make psychos more creative. But yeah, Scream itself, very, very meta film, pokes fun at slashers and
pokes fun at like horror movie tropes in general, not just slashers. And it reinvents the slasher movie, but I think it also kicked off a brand of horror films in general that didn't take themselves too seriously. And I think the fact that allowed some sort of realism to them. I mean, not that you see a man dressed with a ghost face scream and a black Grim Reaper thing run about all the time. And if you do, hide. If I seen that in the street, it would be night out for me. To Tara, I'd be away.
Why?
But it's had, like everything else, it's had its sequels, third films, its fourth. We're going to get a fifth one next year.
Oh, it's shooting at the minute.
Yeah, I'm holding out for it to be actually good.
Well, it's the Ready or Not guys that are doing it, so if anyone's going to take up the mantle from Wes Craven, why not them? Because Ready or Not's just fantastic.
But yeah, so I mean, if anybody hasn't seen Scream,
where have you been?
Where have you been? Why are you listening and watching a podcast about Scream?
Yeah.
But in short, it stars Nate. So I mean, there's a lot of big now actors and actresses in it who were only really starting out. So we have Neve Campbell and title role as Sydney Prescott, who is I mean, you can have your own ideas about Sydney, but she is she's haunted by the death of her mother and finds it quite hard to move on, as one person would. So the film kind of circulates around the anniversary of her mother's death, and her mother's death was quite televised and things at the time as well, because it was so prolific in their small town. And for the life of me, I cannot remember what it's called.
Woodsboro,
that's what it is.
There you
go. So yeah, as you allude to, opening scene's probably one of them up there as one of the most prolific horror scenes
you could
ever.
You could just take that opening segment, and it's one of the greatest horror film shorts ever made.
Yeah.
It's just the pure tension of it all. The conversation itself, like that voice, I think the guy's called Robert Jackson. It's just perfect. And the voice modulator that the killer uses. It's sounding so calm and calm and normal. And I think the turn comes when he says, "Oh, I want to know who I'm looking at," or something like that, or "I want to know him," something like that. And that's when things just boom, everything changes.
And you don't. So the opening scene stars Drew Barrymore in this gorgeous blonde wig, and she's at home, she's watching a scary movie, making popcorn, and she gets a phone call, and it's a strange person on the phone. And initially, like everything else, she just thinks it's a prank call, plays along, and then eventually things turn quite sinister, and she is killed. So the scene and the film, I suppose, kind of that is the accelerant for everything else to kick off. So it then goes into the school, and kind of the same idea of the precautions that were taken with the school in Florida. At their university, they're advised, there's announcements being made not to walk on your own, stay with friends, and there's a lot of sort of television hype and stuff. There's, as we see, the likes of Courtney Cox as Gail. I think Gail, people remember as Monica. I think Gail is probably one of her best characters she's ever played.
It's just the name itself when you think about it. Gail Weathers. Like how silly is that? Like, but it's just, you just buy it. You're like, yeah, it is just Gail Weathers.
It's Gail Weathers, and it's the fact that like it's a Gail Weathers. She's like a TV presenter. She's like a news reporter. She's not a weather woman, but it's just the way the name ties in.
She's like a sexy Stephen Nolan, if you want a comparison. She's just a real sensationalist. She just wants to get the big scoop, the big story, just to make her famous. She just wants fame. That's all she wants. Like she's writing a book about Sydney's mother, and there's a lot of liberties taken with that as well. And she just where Stephen Nolan would sort of like chase you in public. She seduces Dewey just to get more information about the case and the killer and that, and he's just as a big lovable loser, like, and he's just like, oh, okay, Gail, I watched you on TV when I was younger and all this here.
Dewey is Sydney's brother, isn't that right?
Oh no, it's Rose McGowan's brother.
Rose McGowan's brother.
What's her name?
Who is Sydney's best friend.
Hate him.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, coming back to the people, so we've got Henry Winkler's in it.
The Fonz gets filleted.
The Fonz bit is really sad. Neve Campbell, we have, and this is, God forgive me, but I think this is a terrible name. We've got Skeet Ulrich, which you'll notice from a lot of 90s movies, but he is also in Riverdale. And then we've got Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, because I'm not giving him his real name.
Matthew
that's
Lillard.
All he is.
It's Matthew Lillard.
He's Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. If you ever looked at a cartoon and then imagined an actor, it's just him.
As awful as that film is, he's just perfect.
Absolutely. And then there's just different familiar faces pop up from 90s movies, and both horror and sort of comedy as well. So yeah, the story just kind of follows them. They are a group of friends, and they're all kind of the idea of who really cares about Ghostface killer doesn't exist, blah blah blah, and they decide to throw a party, which is a terrible idea. And while they're at the party, then Ghostface comes along and wreaks havoc, and we have that great scene with the guy who, like us, is obsessed with films, and he sort of gives a rundown of the horror tropes. So they're all sitting in the living room, and the rules that not only are used in all of the films, but they've also been used in other horror films, and not so much in a sense of like taking the piss out of Scream, but they've done it as like a homage. So stay averted, so you have to remain.
One's, you can't have sex.
Can't have sex, yeah.
2, no drinking or drugs.
Yeah.
And 3, never say I'll be right back, because you won't be back. And of course, Stu takes the piss out and goes, I'll be right back.
And yeah, all 3 of those things happen in the movie, and
absolutely.
they all cause the same sort of problems.
They have the knock on.
I don't really know whether or not I don't think so if there is people who haven't seen Scream, we'll not give things away. But I'd say the film has probably one of the best twists that you've ever seen in a horror movie.
Well, I know. I think it's fair we can give stuff away because, it's been out since 1996. It's such an iconic film. Anyone worth their grain of salt in terms of being a film or a horror fan should have seen Scream or know about Scream.
Yeah.
So the twist, tell us more about the twist. Come on, Thérèse.
Well, I suppose the twist, so Skeet Ulrich is, his character's Billy, and he is Sydney's boyfriend. So throughout the film, there is sort of hints as to Billy's sort of agenda. He always disappears just before the killer arrives. He always arrives just as the killer's gone away. He's sort of anything that happens to Sydney or to her friends, he kind of shoos it off and is very skeptical about everything. But it turns out that in the end, it was Billy and Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, who in this is called Stu. 2 best friends who are obsessed with horror movies, and they decided that they just wanted to reenact it. And the scene in the kitchen when they both kind of reveal themselves to Sydney is just brilliant.
It's a weird blend of horror and comedy at the same time that just works brilliantly. Like, that is a very, very difficult trick to pull off, but it's just perfect. It's
perfect in the sense that it shows the mentality of the two, and it shows how the 2 of them are absolutely crazy. And
where they injure themselves to make it look like, oh, the killer got me.
They, so in the scene, it's Sydney, Gail is locked in a cupboard, and because eventually Gail is one of the good guys. But Sydney's in the kitchen, and she finds out that it's been Billy and Stu all along, and the 2 guys go into this like an incredible monologue. And Joe, you had alluded to one of the lines earlier, but if you even just watch that scene on YouTube, just with the 2 of them speaking about horror movies and how the generation of this time are so caught up in drugs and this and that, and then, as you said, when they go down the route of injuring themselves, so they have this grand finale that they want to finish at the end, and they want to kill Sydney, but they want to pin it on somebody else, so they're going to look like they're going to be 2 heroes, and they're going to injure themselves, and they're going to say that they were the ones that like got away with it in the end.
They're trying to frame her father, who they have locked up.
Yeah. Which has been the plan all along. So Sydney Prescott basically kicks some absolute ass, and is the badass bitch that she is, and she's up there as one of the best scream queens. And yeah, the two of them get their comeuppance, basically.
Yeah, like just touching on that scene, it has one of the best ad libs in the film history. It's when Sydney is like hiding his ghost face, and she has the voice modulator as well. And she's like, "Oh, Stews, what's your motive?" And he, at this point, he's been stabbed multiple times by Billy, and he's dying. And then she just describes on the phone. It's like, "Did you really?" He's like, "Did you really call the cops?" And she's like, "Yeah." And then he's like, "My parents are going to be so mad at me."
Yeah, and you see him, and he's so gangly, and there's just blood literally pissing out from everywhere, and he's like, "Oh my!" And there's just sudden realization of like, "I'm gonna die."
Yeah, he even tells Billy, "Billy, I think I'm dying here."
Yeah, and Billy's just, you see it, like he's got
crazy.
Crazy eyes, and he's running about, and he's running on and drowning on. When both in reality, the two of them have stabbed each other so much that they're gonna die anyway, so it doesn't matter. But like every good horror movie, you think you get a happy ending, but there's always that sort of inkling at the end that not everything's going to be okay. And then that's how we have Scream 2, Scream 3, Scream 4, and Scream 5 that we said is coming out next year.
Yeah.
Along with hopefully a good few other films. But yeah, I mean, from what we talked about and what happens in the film, I think it's clear to see that there's definite sort of mirror images of
parallels. Yeah,
parallels. You can definitely see that Kevin had a lot of inspiration from the Gainesville Ripper, but I can also see that whether or not it was ever sort of officially alluded to, but the idea of Billy and Stu, two best friends, who at times go about videoing things.
Actually, you know what that reminds me of?
Bran and Tori kind of do something similar, really.
I was thinking that, Bran and Tori, they're more like the two characters in Scream 4. You're the ones that run about with cameras there.
Yeah.
So that's what makes me think maybe in a weird, twisted way, Scream 4 was influenced by that crime.
Yeah, I think there was a few things that I'd read. I don't know if it was, there wasn't any sort of like official sources, but I'd read sort of some subreddits and some Reddit posts about it. And as you said, the two guys, it's been rumored that the two guys in Scream 4 who have that sort of mentality of they want to recreate the greatest horror movie of all time, and them videoing everything is alluding to what Bran and Tori did.
Yeah. But even the film itself, what really hooks you is the fact that you don't know who the killer is. Like before in slashers, okay, it's the majority of the time it's Michael Myers, it's Jason Voorhees, it's Freddy Krueger. You know who it is. But with Ghostface, it's just it's like a murder mystery almost. It's like who done it, and the thing that really works for the film are the red herrings it plants throughout.
Yeah,
like. There's little things like the sheriff putting out a cigarette with his boot, a boot that's the same as, the killer. So you're like, oh, did the sheriff do it? The father goes away on a business trip and then everything kicks off. So is it him? Even Billy himself, I know he eventually was a killer, but they line it up. It's like, oh, he has a phone on him. Oh, maybe he's the killer. Even the principal, because when he catches the two students who are messing about in the hallway and he expels them for dressing up as Ghostface, he's got scissors and it's the weirdest like sound effects. It's like a knife, just like he's like shaking it around these scissors to them, and you're just like, there's something not quite right with his like principal of a high school.
A principal of a high school he literally is just throwing scissors about willy-nilly, like that if you let go it probably could stab somebody. That continues through all the films as well, which I think people have different opinions about 2, 3, and 4. But that's definitely one thing that always holds true, that there's always the red herrings and the sort of idea of, God, Ghostface could be literally anybody, like you don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what I think has really helped it endure and last so long. Like I know we've had, but it's sort of the way it's a teen comedy that just happens to be a horror film as well is what has had all these spin-offs.
Yeah.
We've had I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, there's countless films that just took that idea and copied it. Even the Halloween series took the idea of Scream and reinvented it with H2O. Yeah. And I think even Kevin Williamson was involved in writing that. But I think the key to it is the dialogue. It's sort of like Tarantino for teens.
Yeah.
The way that would speak to each other is all in references to films and stuff like that.
Cult references and kind of punchy attitude type of thing. And at the time the film was released in the 90s, it was like a big thing to behave that way. And it sort of caused its own sort of spiral of people were dressing like Sydney, people were dressing like Tatum. There was somewhat positives for what the film influenced, but as we have talked about, there was some negatives there. I suppose one of the last things just to say is that if you haven't seen them, as I said, there's Scream 1 to 4, and there's also Scream the TV show, which I think is on Netflix for 2 series, which is actually pretty good. It is sort of it has the premise of Scream, but kind of takes it from a totally different storyline. And the first series, as far as I'm aware, was produced by produced by Craven. So we have that influence there. And I think there's another TV show on Netflix called Slasher, possibly, which it doesn't relate to Scream at all, but the main killer, say villain in it basically looks like Scream. So you can see that it sort of had influences throughout. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen Scream, as we said, what have you been doing? Exactly. And this is perfect time with Halloween coming up. And I suppose just mainly to always keep the memory of the victims of the Gainesville Ripper alive as well. Scream is a great film, but there is a horrific background story to it. And while Danny Rowland while he is remembered, the victim should be remembered as well. And it's the same with Cassie Jo Stoddard as well. There is plenty online for both of these grim murders. And as we said, there's YouTube videos that we can get linked into the episode commentary. And there's a lot of podcasts and stuff that me and Joe have both listened to that cover the stories both respectively. But I think that's really all from us. Have you got anything else you want to cover, Joe?
No, it's just I would just find it interesting rewatching Scream after reading about these cases. It sort of gives you a different perspective on things, and as it is like a funny film, and it's really entertaining. But the image of like sort of Danny Rollins and even Casey Jo Stoddard case, like the house at the end where like a load of murders happen in Scream.
Yeah.
That's the house I pictured in my head that Casey was
similar.
House, and so it's like you said, it is something. It's in all cases, it's highly important that you remember the victims more than the scumbags who committed the crimes, and more, and it's just as true when it comes to both the victims of the Gainesville Ripper and the Casey Jo Stoddard's case. So that's pretty much everything. I think we've covered it all with Scream. So do you want to do the honours and give us the lovely plugs?
Yeah, so if you have enjoyed this episode or previous episode and any other of the episodes of the Banterflix podcast, you can follow us on all normal socials. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We also have a Patreon with different levels of a membership that you can apply to. It's all on the Banterflix website. This was part of the Dark Hedges Festival that has been running from the 24th of October onward. So we were just fortunate to be one of the events, and you can also find any of the other events and any of the other live sort of streams and panels that are going to be up over the week. They're all on the Banterflix website, and you can also find that on Facebook as well. That's really it from me. Thanks for your research, Joe, for looking into it, for your help with the YouTube videos, and for forever scarring my memory of Danny Rollins singing in court.
Shitebag cowboy strikes again.
Shitebag cowboy, yeah.
But no, thank you, Thérèse. Again, it's the same reason. All your wonderful research in the Casey Joe Stoddard case, and all you've brought to the table when it comes to Scream and even Danny Rollins himself. So thank you, and thank you more than anything to anyone who's been watching. So thank you for.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it.
And suppose one last thing, if anybody has any recommendations for the next sort of film and or true crime that we can cover, please message into the Twitter or the Facebook. Otherwise, me and Joe are just going to continue doing the ones that we want to do.
Just going to pick them.
You might not necessarily like that. So, yeah, thanks for your time, guys.
Bye.
Bye.